Well, hello, welcome again to a reading through of St Paul's Epistle to the Romans, and I got up to chapter 4. And here in this section we have the faith of Abraham. Paul continues using this straw man genre of question and then refutation. Interesting to compare, Paul uses the example of Abraham to defend his position about faith, about justification by faith, not works. Interesting to compare the same example being used in James, coming to really quite a different conclusion. Whether that was written with this in mind is not known, although certainly the Epistle of James was written well after Romans. So he begins, Tiun erumen hure kenai Abraham ton patropatera hemon katasaka. So we begin with another rhetorical question. What then, erumen, will we say? This is used for the future of, it's ero, used for the future of lego. Shall we say that Abraham ton propatora, from propator, third declension, our forefather Abraham, hure kenai, to have found, our forefather Katasaka, according to the flesh. In other words, perhaps our human forefather. As a Jewish person, Paul would have traced himself right back to Abraham. Hure kenai is the perfect from heurisco. So what then shall we say Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, what would we say that he found? Agar Abraham ex ergon edikaiothe eke kalkema ala uprostion. For if Abraham edikaiothe was declared righteous ex ergon, as a result of works, eke kalkema, then he has something to boast about. Now we've had kalkasis in the earlier chapter, which is more of an abstract noun. So he has something, kalkasis is more of an abstract noun, boasting. Kalkema is a neuter third declension noun, it's more concrete. He has something, some matter to boast about, something that he can boast about. It's probably the only real difference between the two. One is slightly more abstract, but not before God. Tigar he graphe lege, epistusen de Abraham to theo kai elogis theauto estikai sunen. Now we get a quotation here from Genesis 15:6, and it appears elsewhere in the New Testament. It reappears in Galatians 3:6, for example, and James, as I mentioned before, James uses the same example. James 2:23, we have the same quotation. So it's, for what does the scripture, graphe normally almost always refers to the to the Old Testament when it's referred to in the New. So what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as or for righteousness. Tod ergadzomeno homisthos logidzatai katakarin ala kata ophelema. To de me ergadzomeno pistuonti de epiton dikaiunta ton asebei logidzatai hepistisa tu es dikaiasunen. And to the one who works, the reward is not reckoned katakarin, as a favour, but as a debt, as something which is owed to them. There's the verb ophelo, to owe someone. This is the third declension noun, meaning a debt. So the idea, of course, that if you work, you deserve to get paid. They don't give you the pay out of kindness, they give you because you've done the work. But to the one not working, now a connective might have been nice here, but we do have a de. So to the one who does not work, but is believing in the one declaring righteous the impious man, his faith is reckoned as righteousness. So turn it around a bit. For the one who does not work, his faith is reckoned to him as righteousness. To him who believes in the one who declares righteous the impious. Now, people get hung up upon this various uses of pistuo. New Testament has lots of different usages. There's pistuo plus the dative, which is what we got up here in the quotation. There's pistuo eis plus accusative, common in John, I think. There's pistuo en plus the dative, to believe in. And there's pistuo epi, which is what we get here, plus the accusative. There's no real difference. They're just different ways of expressing the same thing. There's no deep, I don't think there's any deep theological distinctions between them. So it's so for this bit here then, so for the one who works, his reward is not reckoned as a favour, but as an obligation. But for the one who does not work, his faith is reckoned as righteousness. For him who believes, for the one believing on the one who declares just the impious man. Alpha privative plus that sebes from sebamai, to show reverence to. This is a third declension adjective. Kathape kai David lege ton makorismon tu anthropu, ho hothios logizdatai, dikai sunain koris ergon. Another quotation, Mekarioi hon ef ethesan hai anomiai, kai hon ep ekalufthesan hai hamatiai. Another quotation, well, part of the same quotation, Makarios aner hu ume logizsetai kurios hamatian. So, kathape, just as in the same way also, David speaks of the makorismos, the blessing of the man, to whom God reckons righteousness apart from works. And we then get a quotation from Psalm 32, 1 to 2, from the Septuagint. And the quotation doesn't really quite, well, it doesn't talk about dikaiosune at all. It's slightly different, but Paul quotes it nonetheless. So, blessed are those of whom, so you've got an antecedent here. So, blessed are those, it's of whom their lawless acts, aphethesan from aphiemi, are forgiven. So blessed are those whose lawless acts, this is an example of hyperbaton, where the relative pronoun is coming before the antecedent. Classical Greek does this very commonly, or fairly commonly, and you'll get it in New Testament and Septuagintal Greek as well. So blessed are those of whose sins, so the sins of whom have been forgiven, this is from aphiemi, and of whom, or whose sins, apokalupthesan, aorist passive from epikalupto, have been covered over. And blessed is the man whose sin, ume plus the subjunctive, strong negation, in no way the Lord will reckon. So blessed is the man whose sin the Lord will in no way count or reckon. Hot mekarismos un hutos epitein peritomen e kai epitein aquibustian legomen ga elogisthe to Abraham he pistis eis dikaiosune. Therefore that man is blessed. The blessing. Therefore this blessing, understand, is upon the peritomen. Again, this is this metonymy here. It means the circumcision, but it refers to the circumcised person, and as does Acribus here. So this blessing is upon the, sorry, it's a question, isn't it? Sorry, is therefore this blessing upon the man who is circumcised or upon the man who is uncircumcised? Legom en gar, for we say, faith was reckoned to Abraham for righteousness. Pos un elogisthe, how then was it reckoned? Now, of course, historically, in the story, I won't say historically, but in the story, Abraham believed all this happened to Abraham before circumcision came along. And so Paul's argument here is that Abraham wasn't circumcised when this happened. So therefore, this is a blessing for those who are uncircumcised. So how then was it reckoned? He says, the question, was it reckoned, understood, for him being in a state of circumcision or in a state of uncircumcision? And I think here he's going back to the other meaning of this peritomai and akribostia. The meaning tends to shift a bit in Paul. Sometimes it's the state and sometimes it's the person who's in that state. It was not in a state of uk en peritomai al en akribostia. It was not in a state of circumcision, but in a state of uncircumcision. Kai semeion eleben peritomes sfragida tes dikaiasunes tes pistios tes en te akribostia eis to enaiauton patera panton ton pistuonton di acribostias es to logisthenae kai autois ten dikaiasunein kai patera peritomes tois uk en peritomes monon alakai tois stoikusin tois ignasen tes en akribostia pistios to patros hemon Abraham. So long sentence here. And he received, aorist from Lambano, a sign of circumcision, and in apposition to the semeion as a sfragida. A sfragis is a seal. So as a seal of the righteousness of the faith, so perhaps of his faith, or perhaps righteousness which came from faith, maybe a defining genitive here, which, understand, he had in a state of uncircumcision. So Paul's argument here is because Abraham wasn't circumcised at this point, then he's the father of those who believe in a state of uncircumcision, because that's the way Abraham was. It's a fairly, slightly sophistic argument. So that he is the father of all those believing D through, perhaps in a state of uncircumcision, with the result that righteousness, now if we read the Kai, is also to be reckoned to them, that is, those who are uncircumcised. So with the result that righteousness is also to be reckoned to them. And the father of circumcision to those not only as a result of circumcision, but also to those, I'll come back to this word, something like marching in the footprints of the faith of our father Abraham when he was in a state of uncircumcision. This verb here, stoikio, very interesting verb. It's a military term. It means to march in file. It does appear only once in the Septuagint, and that's in Ecclesiastes 11:16, where it's got a different meaning. It means to prosper there. But here it's got just the sense of, the old classical sense is just to march in line. Paul tends to use some interesting military terms in a lot of his genuine writings. and one wonders whether he had had some kind of military service or was familiar with the military. Perhaps in those days you would anyway, because there were lots of soldiers wandering around, but it's interesting he uses these sort of military terms, stoichio, here. So just to do that bit again, because it's fairly complicated. So he took a sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness, and then I think a defining genitive, which comes from faith, which happens in a state of uncircumcision, so that he is the father of all those believing in a state of uncircumcision, with the result that righteousness has been reckoned even or also to them. And he is also the father of circumcision to those not as a result of circumcision alone, but also to those who march in the footsteps of the faith, the tes goes with the pistios, which takes place in a state of uncircumcision. So it's the faith of our father Abraham, which took place when he was in a state of uncircumcision. Ignesin is a dative plural from ignos, meaning a footprint. So those walking in the footprint of the faith of our father Abraham, who was in a state of uncircumcision. So that is the first part of chapter 4.